Obviously, from the bumper video, you know that we're in a series called Good. And good, we're talking about a variety of things that are good. And today, we're talking about being a good neighbor and how important that is. On the back of your bulletin, you'll find an outline there that you can follow along with. You can fill in some blanks if you'd like to as well. And that will maybe help you to reflect on those questions even at the end, maybe as you're going home today or sometime during this week. We all know about neighbors, don't we? You may have grown up with some neighbors that you were very close to. Maybe you had a neighborhood and everybody kind of knew each other, and you rode the school bus with other kids there. You walked to school, and parents knew each other. Maybe you lived out in the country, and you kind of knew each other through other activities out there. But one way or another, we're all pretty familiar with having a neighbor, aren't we? We also know that television presents some pictures of neighbors that are kind of unique too, right? For example, there was Wilson on Home Improvement, always the guy behind the fence. Remember him? Always Tim the Tool Man was always talking to him, but you could never see Wilson's face. He always concealed that. There was also Kramer from Seinfeld. He had that wild hair. He was always kind of going crazy when he came into Jerry's apartment. There were Fred and Ethel Mertz. Remember them from I Love Lucy all those years ago? Just always doing things with Ricky and Lucy. Barney and Betty Rubble, two of my favorite neighbors of all time from the Flintstones. There was Stephen Urkel on Family Matters. Remember him? And there was also Mr. Rogers, who I talked about a little bit last week as well. Hey, listen, when you're hunting for a new home, proximity is important, isn't it? Location is important. We are interested in how close we are to schools and banks and shopping centers and doctors' offices and those kinds of things. But it's not just proximity that we're interested in. We're also interested in the quality of the neighborhood that we're possibly moving to. For example, if you're looking at homes and you see a home right next to the one that you are interested in buying, and there's this big RV that's out there in the front yard up on blocks next to the sofa and the washer that are out there, chances are that may not be where you want to move to. Yeah, maybe you do. Maybe that's what you like, but chances are you would probably not like that too well. It's also possible that you wouldn't want to move to a neighborhood where the thieves have stolen the neighborhood watch signs. That's not a good sign either, for that matter. Or to move next to the guy that repairs tubas, and he works on them 24 hours a day. That would probably not be the best way to have a neighborly conversation on a regular basis with a guy either. You know, you can't always choose your neighbors, but you can choose to be a good neighbor. That's important for us, isn't it? And today we're going to talk about some biblical ways of us being able to do that. I want to give you 4 characteristics about how you can have this working plan for being able to reach out to a neighbor. Now, that neighbor might be somebody in the house next to you. It might be somebody in the cubicle next to you at work. It might be somebody on the stair climber next to you at the gym. It might be somebody who is in your row at church. But I want you to know this, that Jesus said that we are to love our neighbor. He said it's God's will that we are good neighbors. He said that the 2 greatest commandments are that we love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that we love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Now, that's important. And so as we begin to look into this message today, I hope that will be a filter that you run everything else that I say through. How we're supposed to love God with all of who we are, and we're to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. The very first thing that we're supposed to be, I believe, is to be a friendly neighbor. Live a friendly life. Be somebody who is willing to reach out to those people who are either moving in next door or maybe who have lived there for a while. You're the one moving in, or maybe you've just kind of been in the neighborhood for a while, don't really know each other. Turn into a friendly person. Be a person who looks for those other relationships. You know, the Hubble Space Telescope was launched from the Space Shuttle Discovery on April the 24th, 1990. Expectations were really high. Scientists were expecting to be able to see new galaxies. They were looking for all kinds of verification for the theories and for the hypotheses that they had launched before. And at launch time, the Hubble Space Telescope cost over $1.5 billion. It was totally an expensive project, and it was going to be the world's most powerful and accurate telescope. The primary mirror on this telescope was nearly 8 feet across and weighed nearly a ton. It was ground as closely as possible as it could be. The curve didn't deviate by more than 1/800,000th of an inch. It was perched 353 miles above the earth. It had an unobstructed view that could peer light years into space and observe previously undiscovered galaxies. Hopes were very high. There was a problem, though, that developed. And the problem was that even though this was a great and very expensive thing, the mirror, the primary mirror that I just talked to you about, was flawed. Things that were supposed to be clear as anything ended up being fuzzy. And scientists were like pulling their hair out trying to get this thing fixed. The problem wasn't the size of it, it wasn't the power of it, it was the focus of it that was out. And so in December of 1993, astronauts aboard the space shuttle Endeavour fitted a corrective optic lens to this particular mirror. And this was a success as well. So the repairs corrected the Hubble's previously blurry vision, allowed the telescope to explore the universe with unprecedented precision and clarity. It was only when this Hubble Space Telescope was focused that it could carry out the mission that it was designed to do. It was something it was supposed to see properly. Size was important, power was important, but focus was most important. And I believe that one of the keys to you and I being good neighbors is to have focus, so much so that we are willing to see our neighbors with clarity, that we are able to look at them and say, that is somebody that Jesus loves. That's somebody that God is calling me to be a good neighbor to. That's somebody that I need to make the effort to get to know in some way or another. So when someone moves into your neighborhood, introduce yourself to them. Don't seclude yourself. Don't stay back and look through the curtains and just say, hey, there's somebody else moving in across the road. Make sure you go out there. Make sure that you are bringing some brownies or some cookies over to them. If you see them unloading boxes, why don't you call and have a pizza ordered to be brought out, and you go over and help them unload those boxes while they're doing that. If we put ourselves in their shoes, we know that moving to a new area can be something which is exciting, but also a bit overwhelming. They have left behind friendships. They have left behind routines. They probably don't know anyone or very few people yet. So you and I have the privilege and the possibility of being able to point them to a new doctor for themselves or a new dentist. We can introduce them to other friends. We can also invite them to church, can't we? Or to come to our life group at our house. God may just be bringing them into your path as a divine appointment so you can engage them in conversation, not only to ease their move, but also to eventually help them to know Jesus Christ if they don't know him yet. You know, when Solomon was writing the Proverbs, he had some tremendous statements in there, things that we can just base our lives on, no doubt about it. One of the things that he said about friendship, I think, is especially important. He said, a man who has friends must himself be friendly. Now, I sometimes paraphrase that, and I say, if you're going to have friends, you have to be friendly. You have to be a person who is willing to reach out and introduce yourself to other people. And I know that it's important that we are willing to take that first step, because many times other people are a little shy about doing that. So if you and I are going to be good neighbors, one of the things we need to exercise is friendliness. Now, I realize that there are relational dynamics that come into play in this. I realize that if you're a single woman, you may want to be careful about how friendly you are to a male neighbor. If you are a married person, you may still want to make sure that that other person or those people know that you are committed to your spouse. It also could be that some neighbors just aren't all that approachable. They've got the pit bull chained up in the yard. They got barbed wire fence around their place. They got a sign saying, warning, landmines in yard. I mean, if they've got all that stuff out there, chances are they don't want to meet you. They don't want to become your friend. Take the hint. Pray for them, but take the hint, okay? But in most cases, many people are not going to have that kind of a scenario. And in most cases, you are going to be able to reach out and be friendly to them. Now, here's another thing. Live an authentic life. Live an authentic life. John Stone Street says Christianity may be personal, but it's not private. I love that. It may be personal, but it is not private. You know, we have a member of our church. Her name is Carol Watkins. Carol sits right down here in the second row in the first service oftentimes, sometimes in here. You've probably seen her before. She got short red hair, and she's all the time hugging people and being real friendly and all that kind of thing. That's just the way Carol is. One of the things that stands out about Carol to many people is that she is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Now, we need to pray for her, okay? But she is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. She should be a Bucks fan or a Colts fan or something like that, but she is a Steelers fan. Now, how do I know that? It's because she used to have this van that she would drive around with, and on the back was a tire, and the tire cover was a Pittsburgh Steelers emblem on that. I've been to her house before. She has one room that is completely filled with Pittsburgh Steelers stuff. In her yard today, if you drove past her yard, she lives 2 streets over that way. Do that just to see what it's like. She has a Pittsburgh Steelers flag out in her yard. There is no way that you can miss the fact that Carol is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. She is genuine to the core on that. She is probably hanging her head right now because they and the Cleveland Browns tied in the game last week. Listen, I have to bring this up to you Steelers fans because, listen, Ohio State could have beaten the Browns. Listen, Riverview High School probably could have beaten the Browns last week, okay? So the Steelers have some work to do. But regardless of that, Carol is a Steelers fan. She loves the Steelers. You know how authentic and genuine she is with that, and she is not going to change no matter what. And if you are going to be a good neighbor, you have to ask yourself a question: how genuine am I? If my neighbor comes to believe that Christians are like me, what will they believe about our faith? If I go around them and I start putting other people down in the neighborhood, will they believe that I will do the same thing about them when I go to talk to other neighbors? If I'm a complainer, will they be drawn to my faith, or will they be repelled by my words? If I'm telling jokes of questionable moral value, they might laugh, but at the same time, what will they believe about my faith if they see me backing out of my driveway on Sunday morning with my family to come to church? You see, we are giving an impression, aren't we? We are giving an impression about the authenticity of our faith. Often the biggest obstacle to lost people finding Jesus is other people. The fact is that oftentimes those who say they follow Jesus don't look distinctive at all, and they don't exhibit authenticity. People are watching and they say, nothing is different about you. You're the same as all the other people that I know. Our neighbors probably believe, if they know we're a Christian, that our lives ought to be different. If Jesus was so important to us, we would actually change our lives, they're thinking. So the key is, our example is important. Albert Schweitzer talked about that. He said, example is not the best way of teaching, it's the only way. And isn't that true for us with our neighbors as well? If they see us as authentic, chances are they will be drawn to what we are saying about Jesus Christ or how we live our life for him. If they see duplicity, if they see us not being real before them, or see us being inconsistent, then chances are they're going to just view us as a hypocrite. And God needs us to be good neighbors, amen? God is calling us, commanding us to be good neighbors. So guard your example. Let your neighbors know that you know this person named Jesus Christ, and he has changed your life and is in the process of changing your life. Be authentic in your faith. There's a third thing: live a helpful life. Live a helpful life. You know, Jesus gave us what we call the golden rule. He said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Billy Graham said one time, the highest form of worship is the worship of unselfish Christian service. You know, being a good neighbor means that you are going to look for an opportunity to be helpful. You know, one day there was a guy who was a teacher of the law, and he and some other people came around Jesus, and this guy was trying to kind of trap Jesus. So he asked him a question. He said, Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he was kind of hoping that Jesus might come up with something that might be contrary to the law. So Jesus says, well, what do the law and prophets say? And he said, well, the law says that I'm to love God with all of my heart, mind, soul, and strength, and I'm to love my neighbor as myself. And Jesus said, you've answered correctly. Go and do likewise. And so it looks like that ought to be the end of the conversation. But the guy, as I told you, is trying to pull one over on Jesus, trying to trap him, make him look kind of bad in front of the other people, maybe just kind of diss him a little bit. And so this man says, well, who's my neighbor? Can't you just imagine him just kind of folding his arms and kind of getting this bit of a grin on his face like the Cheshire Cat and kind of a twinkle in his eye, thinking like, I got you. And Jesus came up with a story. I love that. Jesus always had a way of being able to turn things around, didn't he? And in this story, he told about this guy who was coming from the city of Jerusalem going on this road that was desolate, on the road to Jericho. Now, I've been on that road before, and it is desolate. It's a road that has twists and turns in it. There are caves along the way. There are hills that a person could hide behind if they wanted to. And, of course, everybody who hears this story that Jesus is telling has probably been on that road before. They know what he's talking about. It's like us saying, if you go up I-75, we all have been on I-75. We know what that's about, don't we? We understand that. And so Jesus has given them a story or a place that they can identify with. He says this guy's going along, and suddenly he is jumped by a band of robbers. And they take his stuff that he's got, because he probably did business up in Jerusalem. They take his stuff, they take his clothes, and knock him down. They leave him half dead, Jesus said. And as he's laying there on the road, bleeding out there, along comes this guy that Jesus said was a priest. And he's on his way to Jerusalem. And the priest sees this man lying there, and instead of going up to help him, he goes on the other side of the road, makes this wide berth, and then keeps on going his way. Probably thinking to himself, I don't have time to do anything about this right now. I'm needed up in Jerusalem. And Jesus said another guy comes along. He's a Levite. He's also a religious guy, and he too does the same thing. He goes on the other side of the road. Now, so they're all listening to this and hearing the story, and then Jesus throws in this unexpected twist. He says, then along comes a Samaritan. Now, as soon as he said the word Samaritan, they all get this impression. And there's probably a little bit of a tightness that they feel at that point. Today, we know that over in Israel, there's tension between those who are Israelis and those who are Palestinians. And, it wouldn't be a whole lot different in those days with the story of how it was between the Samaritans and the Jews. They just did not like each other. And so as they are going along, and Jesus is telling this story, we find that he says, hey, this Samaritan comes along. He looks at this man, and they're all expecting him to say, yeah, he was glad to see him in that condition. Glad to see him being there on the road, bleeding to death, hoping he will die soon. But instead, he gets off of his animal. He goes over. He tends to the wounds of this guy. He eventually wraps him up, puts him on his donkey, and starts walking alongside this donkey with the man on top of it. And they go until they find an inn. And when they get to the inn, then they go in, and this Samaritan pays for this Jewish guy to stay there. Gives the innkeeper 2 silver coins. And then he says, and if he accrues any more expense, I'll come back by again, and I will reimburse you. He is taking care of his needs. There's no doubt about that. So Jesus tells this story, and then he says, okay, which one of these is a true neighbor to this guy? Who is the neighbor right here? And so this man gives the answer. He says, well, it's the one who had mercy on him. And then Jesus says, go and do likewise. A good neighbor is a helpful neighbor. Helping can take a relationship and add glue to it, can't it? It can change things around. That means that we have to have our eyes and ears open for needs of people around us. We have to be ready and willing to respond. Now, it's easy to come up with excuses, isn't it? Well, I can't do anything in my neighborhood. My question for somebody who says I can't do anything in my neighborhood is, well, can you bake anything? Can you water flowers while your neighbors are away? Can you rake leaves if they need some help in that? When you're out walking on your 2-mile walk every day, can you see them and stop and smile and say hello to them and see if they have any needs? Can you take an interest in their life? It may not be any more than loaning a lawnmower to them. Or if they need something, they say, hey, I've got a need for eggs or flour. You say, yeah, I've got some. You can have them. It may not be any more than taking your neighbor's child to soccer practice or getting mail while they're on vacation. But if we're going to be good neighbors, we have to be ready to be helpful. We have a guy in our church who has had some health problems, and he's got a wonderful neighbor who comes over and has been giving him his medicine and shots when he needs that. This man is a doctor, and he is highly qualified, and he goes over and has been going over every day for a long time until recently when this man moved to another facility. And he has been doing this for a long time, looking for a way to be helpful. He's just being a good neighbor in the process of doing that. How can you be involved in your neighborhood? Keep your eyes open. Keep your focus where it needs to be. And say, God, how can I help these people who are around me? A good neighbor also is a missional neighbor. They're going to live a missional life. Sometimes it's easy for churches to kind of do that Las Vegas mantra, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Only for the church, it's like what happens in church stays in church. And for some reason or another, churches oftentimes don't take that message outside of the four walls. For whatever reason. Now, it's easy, I know, to be frustrated by culture today. It's easy to say, at one time the values of the community were influenced by Christian thought. It's easy to say that one time when you went out the door that there were people, even if they didn't practice the faith, at least respected the faith. And we know that now that isn't really the case, that the church has lost a lot of ground that at one time that it held. It seems that we've been kind of relegated to the cutout bin of culture. But the last thing that we need to do is withdraw from engagement with others who are different from us. We cannot be a fortress and say, we're going to stay inside here and stay away from that post-Christian culture around us. We cannot afford to huddle up. We cannot afford to circle the wagons and be what Jesus calls us to be, because huddling and circling the wagons means that we have stopped reaching people. And we can be friendly. We can welcome people when they come in. That's important. But what are we doing to invite others? How are we going to other people and saying, listen, let me tell you about this person, Jesus, that I know. Or let me bring you to church along with me. I'll sit with you and I'll take you out to lunch afterwards. How are we doing that? How are we as a congregation doing that? How are we as believers in general doing that? Are we taking the message outside our doors, or are we just expecting people to come to us? It's important that we are willing to be missional in the process. There are hurting people who are around us. There are people in our neighborhoods who need an extra dose of mercy. Pastor Erwin McManus said the church offers community to those who have no community. Jesus said we are to be salt and light. He wants us to be purposely engaged in enriching the lives of other people and preserving culture and shining spiritual light into their hearts and minds. He is calling us to be missional. Where did we get the idea that salt is supposed to stay in the salt shaker? Where did we get the idea that light needs to be hidden behind closed curtains? But that's what a lot of Christianity is doing today. And we are called to be something different than that. We are called to be neighborly to those who need the message of Jesus and who need us in their lives. Today, the needs of people are multiple. Marriages are hanging on by a thread. Parents who are ready to throw in the towel are saying, I don't know what to do. Teens are starving for their parents' attention and approval. There are people with lost jobs and sickness and loneliness. We are connected socially, but we are not connected relationally with other people. We have Facebook and Instagram, but people don't know how to talk to other people in person. People are lonely. Listen, if you're a student, look for the kid at school who's sitting by themselves in the cafeteria and go over and sit with them. If you see the kid that's being bullied at school, go over and walk alongside them. Say, I'll be your friend. I'll stand alongside you. At work, maybe there's somebody who always gets stuck doing the bad stuff. They're poorly treated, given the jobs that no one else wants to do. Come alongside them and say, I'll help you. I'll help you. You are my neighbor. Did you know that Jesus lives in your neighborhood and in my neighborhood? He does. Jesus is the latchkey kid who just needs somebody to play catch with him. Jesus is the elderly widow who is dying of loneliness. Jesus is that young couple who would give anything for a couple with a healthy marriage to come alongside them and encourage them and say, you know what? You can make it through this. We will help you. We will stand alongside you. In Matthew 25, Jesus talked about two groups of people who will stand before him at the judgment day. He's dividing them up into two groups. One is calling the sheep, one is calling the goats. You know the defining difference between the sheep and the goats that Jesus gives us? One of them did things for those who had needs, and one of them didn't do things for those who had needs. Jesus said, when you've done it for the least of these, you have done it to me. And he also said the opposite. When you didn't do it for the least of these, you didn't do it for me. Jesus lives in your neighborhood. He lives in my neighborhood. His face looks like your neighbor. His face looks like the kid walking to school every day by himself who gets picked on. His face looks like that person who has been hurt. His face looks like the person who is hungry, who has very little. That's Jesus. He's calling people like you and me to make a difference, to be good neighbors. Chris Shook tells the story about a letter she received from a couple named Armando and Tammy. They went to the Dominican Republic on a mission trip, and Armando wrote, he said, during a particular prayer, as my head was bowed, I noticed a pair of filthy, worn-out, wrong-sized tennis shoes on the feet of a teenage boy. My heart began to ache for that child and every child there, all of them with similar shoes or no shoes at all. Some kids had one shoe. Some ran barefoot. Some, fortunate enough to have shoes at all, had them in the worst condition. On the last day of our trip, the boy whose shoes I had noticed asked me for the shoes on my feet. Initially, I laughed it off. We went about our activities, but as I sat on the bus, leaving the site, I realized that I had missed a huge opportunity. Right there on the bus, my desire to help those children in a real way exploded. There was something I had to do. And Armando and Tammy came back to the U.S. without their tennis shoes, but they came back with a dream and a vision from God. You know what they did? They went around their neighborhood, and they began to ask people to join them in providing shoes for kids in the DR. They went around being missional. They went around engaging their neighbors and saying, look, can you help us? Here's a need that we saw down there. And you can help, maybe buy a pair of tennis shoes or give us some shoes that you don't wear anymore. Whatever it was, they went around their neighborhood, began collecting, and they sent a lot of shoes down there to help kids. But God had something even bigger in mind for them. God took that dream and that vision, and he multiplied it, because soon they partnered with their church to make an annual event held in Texas, teaming up with Armando and Tammy to take that vision to the next level. They collected more than 10,000 pairs of shoes to be given to kids in the Dominican Republic who had none. That's being a neighbor, isn't it? That's saying, how can I get engaged to help somebody? How can I be missional with my faith? How can I make my neighbors be like Jesus and help them like I am Jesus to them? Chris Shook says, here's an important takeaway. God doesn't ask us to do something big for him. He just asks us to love the one in front of us. Isn't that cool? Just ask us to love the one in front of us. See, sometimes we have these big visions. I got to go over here to do all this work for God. In reality, he may just be calling you to your neighbor. He may just be calling you to that kid at school. He may just be calling you to that coworker at the desk next to you. He may just be calling you to the person on the treadmill next to you at the gym. He may be calling you to that person standing next to you fishing out along the dock. Whatever it might be, he may be calling you to that person for their need. It's funny how a missional life can rub off. Maybe it's God is calling you to involve your neighbors in a project. Maybe you can get them to donate towards hurricane relief for the Carolinas. Maybe you can rally them around a widow or a widower in the neighborhood and start taking that person some gifts along the way, making soup for them, making some food for them, giving them a ride to the doctor, mowing their grass, whatever it might be. Or maybe you can give food, have your neighborhood give food for our Isaiah 58 ministry to help those who are homeless and struggling. Maybe God is calling you today to organize a trip for our church to go to our neighbors in the Carolinas to help provide a needy neighborhood with some help, with clearing out some debris, or repainting some walls, or providing some encouragement. Years ago, we went to Mississippi to clean up after Hurricane Katrina came through. And I tell you what, that trip didn't involve tons of people. We took a van of people with us. We stayed there for about 5 or 6 days. But I tell you what, it was a trip that we accomplished a lot in. God used us to make a difference for the people in Pascagoula, Mississippi, who had been hit hard by that hurricane. What's to stop us from going up to North or South Carolina saying, hey, we want to partner with you and do some cleanup for you, to make a difference for you? Because you're our neighbor. You are our neighbor. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, he pitched his tent there. Isn't that nice to know? There's someone else in Scripture as they were writing, as John was writing in the book of John, he says that Jesus came and dwelt among us, pitched his tent right here. But you know what that also means? It means Jesus became our neighbor. Jesus became our neighbor. He didn't just stay in Israel. He moved into your neighborhood and into my neighborhood, into your heart and into my heart. And if you say, I don't know what to do in my neighborhood, I can tell you what. Do this. Pray. Pray for them. Pray for that neighbor. Every time you see them back in the car, out of the driveway, going to work, pray for them. Give them a good day, Lord. Keep them safe in traffic. Help me to find a way to help them when the time comes, when they need that. Help me to be a good neighbor to them. Every time you hear another neighbor and his wife or her husband arguing in the night, pray for them. God, please give them peace. Every time there's some kid with a subwoofer blown up so much that it's just thumping you in the chest, even though you're in the middle part of your house and you're feeling that, pray for him. Pray, first of all, he turns it down. But then pray for him that he meets the person he really needs to meet in Jesus Christ. There are all kinds of scenarios that we could talk about right now, but the key is being a good neighbor, is being missional towards praying for your neighbors, being there for your neighbors, loving your neighbors, being a good neighbor to them. That's important. Be friendly, helpful, authentic, and missional. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 5:16 that he was being compelled by a new perspective. He said, so from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Paul arrived at the conclusion he was no longer free to look at people from a purely earthly human perspective. His thinking was, if Jesus loved those people enough to die for them, then I no longer have the freedom to look at them differently than Christ looks at them. And you and I should feel the same way. I need to look at those people like Christ loves them, and it will give me a totally new perspective. I have to remember to love them, pray for them, go to them when the opportunity presents itself. Jesus moved into our neighborhood. He wants to make a difference in your life. Someone came today who needs a difference in their life. Someone came today hurting. Someone came today lonely. Someone came today saying, you know what, I get picked on at school. Someone came today saying, no one in my neighborhood knows my name. Someone came today feeling sad. Someone came today who needs to know that you are loved and that God can make a difference in your life through Jesus Christ. You see, he calls those of us who are already Christians to be good neighbors to you. To be good neighbors to you. And good neighbors care about their neighbors. You know what you need today? You need that relationship that's the best relationship you can ever have. You need to make the most important decision that you can ever make today, to surrender your life to Jesus Christ, to allow him to move into your heart. He's knocking at the door of your heart today. He says, let me in. I want to change your life. I want to live there. I want to help you. I want to be there for you. I want to give you a family like this who will be there to support you and encourage you and give you peace where there hasn't been any peace for a long time, and to give you hope. That's what you need today. We're going to give you this invitation song as an opportunity to respond. I'm going back to the back by the sign that's back there near our back door. And if you would like to talk about giving your life to Jesus today and would like to do so, I'll be right there. I would love to talk with you about that and help you to make that decision as well. Let's stand together and you sing and you join me back in the back if that's where you feel like God is calling you to do today.